Hi, I'm Kaylee, and these are all the books that I read in July. I really enjoyed Jane Austen July this year and had so much fun reading Jane Austen and reading Jane Austen related stuff. So this is going to be my Jane Austen July wrap up and everything else that I read in July as well. Before we dive into everything that I read, I'm going to reach back here to our Booktuber Shoutout book, and we're going to shout out somebody randomly. Today's shout out goes to Rainy Day Reads. I'll leave a link to their channel in the description. Be sure to go over and subscribe to them. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe to this channel. Give this video a thumbs up if you had a great reading month in July. And of course, follow me over on Instagram and Goodreads and Storygraph and all the places. I read 24 books in July. I read 4 classics, 2 fantasy, 1 manga, 3 mystery, 2 children's, 2 nonfiction, 1 historical fiction, 1 retelling of a Jane Austen book, which actually I DNF'd that, so that probably doesn't really count. And I read 8 picture books. So really, I guess it was 23 books in July because I DNF'd the retelling. The group read for Jane Austen July was Sense and Sensibility, and I really enjoyed reading it in Spanish. It's been my personal goal the last couple of Jane Austen Julys that I want to read Jane Austen in Spanish, so I've been enjoying that quite a lot. I did a whole nother very lengthy video all about my thoughts about Sense and Sensibility. The video's in English though, it's not in Spanish. So be sure to go over and watch that whole big video all about Sense and Sensibility. I also did a comparison video of 2 different film adaptations of Sense and Sensibility. So be sure to go over and watch that video as well. Something about watching Jane Austen on film really gives you a different perspective into the characters and the story. So of course I had a lot to say about the film adaptations. One of the challenges for Jane Austen July is to read a retelling of a Jane Austen novel. For that, I tried to read Unmarriageable, which is retelling of Pride and Prejudice, which is set in modern-day Pakistan. Unfortunately, I DNF'd it at page 49. It was just full of really crass jokes. It was really quite vulgar and just not at all my cup of tea. So I was really quite disappointed in that one. Another challenge is to read a historical fiction that is set in Jane Austen's time. So for that, I was delighted to read The Duke's Last Word by Sophie Lee Fox. I was very lucky to meet the author at a meeting of the Jane Austen Society in Atlanta, and she sent me an e-copy of her book for review. This is just a really sweet, clean romance. It's exactly what I wanted. Just something adorable and funny and delightful. This book definitely gave me that Jane Austen sort of vibe. So this is the story of Willa, who is shocked when her father announces that she has to get married to the Duke in order to pay off her father's gambling debts. And James, the Duke in question, has to fulfill a legal clause where he has to get married by his next birthday or he will lose his inheritance. But Willa is fiercely independent and refuses to marry the Duke. But James is hoping to change her mind, and he uses all his charm to beguile her into marriage. I really loved Willa's character. She's a very complex, multi-layered character. And I liked that James starts out really self-centered and thoughtless. He's just been spoiled because of his rank and his riches. But when Willa refuses him, it really makes him take a step back and look at his life and his character. He starts to think more about Willa's feelings instead of just thinking about himself. So he has some really great character development, really excellent. However, there were a few little things in the story that kind of got on my nerves. There's a few little errors in grammar in the e-copy that I received. There are a couple of trigger warnings for a few things. But overall, it's a delightfully clean romance that just delighted my heart. I ended up giving this one 3 stars. Also, as part of this challenge to read a historical fiction, I read Jane and the Year Without a Summer and Jane and the Final Mystery. Those are the last 2 books in the Jane Austen mystery series by Stephanie Barron. In this mystery series, Jane Austen herself is the main character, and we follow real events in her life and things that she said in her letters and people that she knew and places that she visited. But then on top of that, there's a fictional murder mystery, and Jane is the amateur detective. solving the murder mystery. Most of the books in this series got 4 or 5 stars from me, and I've done a whole nother video reviewing the entire series. So you can go over and watch that video and see all my thoughts about the Jane Austen mystery series. Another Jane Austen July challenge is to read a book written by a contemporary of Jane Austen. And for this, I listened to an audiobook of Evelina by Frances Burney. I've had Evelina on my TBR for years, and I'm so glad that I finally sat down and read it. I really enjoyed the audiobook that I listened to, and I did a whole nother review video with all my thoughts about Evelina. So be sure to go over and watch that video to see everything that I thought about this lovely classic. I also read a couple of books by Louisa May Alcott. I read Rose in Bloom, which is the second book in the 8 Cousins duology. And then I reread Under the Lilacs. I've read both of these many, many times. I just love Louisa May Alcott's wholesome, innocent stories. They really have that lovely old-fashioned charm. So in Under the Lilacs, this is a story of Ben, who has run away from the circus. He finds compassion and generosity in the house under the lilacs. He's basically adopted by Miss Celia and her brother Thorny. And while he is grateful for their kindness, it's really difficult for Ben to adjust to a slow country life when he's been used to the thrill of traveling with the circus. As always, I just love Louisa May Alcott's writing style. The sweetness of her stories just delights me every time. And in Rose in Bloom, Rose has returned from a year abroad to find that all of her boy cousins are quite grown up now. And suddenly they're all on the brink of adulthood. They're starting their careers and they're finding romance. So this book has a more mature focus and a few darker themes than the first book when Rose is just a child. There are themes about alcoholism and death, clan loyalty and elitism, and also philanthropy and having very strong moral principles. I really love seeing how all these characters grow and develop in the second book in the duology. I always cry, like ugly cry, okay, when this one certain character dies. And I have read this book like dozens of times, okay? I probably read it like 25 times or something by now. And I always cry. I also read a couple more books in the Great Mouse Detective series. I read Basil and the Big Cheese Cook-Off, and I read Basil and the Royal Dare. I've always been a fan of the Great Mouse Detective cartoon, so of course I was delighted to discover that the movie is actually based on a book series, and I have loved following Basil and Dawson through all their mysterious adventures. The writing is charming, the stories are exciting, the mysteries are full of wild clues that only Basil can figure out. And in these editions, I really love the adorable illustrations that bring those little mouse characters to life. I gave both of these 4 stars. And I also read a manga that I got from the library, Summer Wars. My friends at my book club recommended this one to me, and I really liked it. So Kenji is surprised when the most popular girl at school invites him to her family home in the country for a weekend in the summer. He finds it awkward to fit in with her rich and affluent family, especially because Natsuki is pretending that he is her fiancé. While visiting there, Kenji receives a work email from Oz. This is an online virtual world where he has some part-time work doing like web maintenance. The email contains a code to be solved. And Kenji loves math puzzles, so he solves the code and he sends in the answer. But the next morning, he discovers that he has unwittingly unleashed chaos into the online world of Oz. I really enjoyed this manga, and now that I've read it, I really want to watch the movie. The plot is a very interesting mix of real life and online life. And the way that the two realities kind of intertwine and affect one another is very interesting. It's really complex because some of the characters just think that Oz is like, kids online gaming or something. They don't realize how central it is and how important it is. They think the young people are just wasting their time on games. But there's this really beautiful storyline where all these different generations of this family learn to understand each other better and to appreciate the different strengths that each generation brings to the table. They really learn to value each other, and I just love that family togetherness. And I really love Kenji's character and the way he finds this inner strength, this courage and inspiration to help Natsuki's family. I gave Summer Wars 4 stars. One of the books from my Wrapped Books challenge was The Elusive Mrs. Pollifax. I just love Dorothy Gilman's writing. I don't typically like spy novels, really, but when it's Mrs. Pollifax, then I do. So in this book, Mrs. Pollifax is recruited by the CIA to deliver some passports to the underground resistance in communist Bulgaria. At first, it seems like a straightforward courier job, but of course nothing is ever straightforward with Mrs. Pollifax. She befriends a group of young hippie tourists, and when one of them is arrested for espionage, Mrs. Pollifax suspects that something else is going on. This is just everything a spy novel should be. The suspense and the humor and the horror and the adventure and the friendship and the surprise twists. It's all there in abundance. The writing is superb. The plot is fantastic. The characters have some great development. And just there's these little insights into human nature. There's this fresh brilliance in the writing. I just can't describe it. A phrase here and there will kind of jump out at you with its rightness. It just like, yes, that was the right, perfect thing for that scene. Her writing is just that good. I gave this one 5 stars. Of course, I gave it 5 stars. I also finally finished reading Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban in Spanish. That was really more of a book I was reading in June, but I still had a few little chapters left, and so I actually finished it in July. Prisoner of Azkaban is my favorite book out of the Harry Potter series, mainly just because of Remus Lupin. So reading Remus Lupin in Spanish was even more delightful. The rest of the books in this video are books that I received from the publisher for free in exchange for a free and honest review. So the publisher sent me Rook, and I started reading it, and around chapter 3 or 4, right when I was really hooked into the story, then I realized, wait a minute, this is the last book in a series. Or at least it's like a spin-off of the last book in a series. Yes. So I got completely spoiled for the entire 4 books that come previously in this series. But at that point, I was hooked. I could not put it down. I was like, I don't care if I'm getting spoiled. I have to read this. So this is about Miss Rook, who is used to being the assistant to a paranormal detective, Mr. Jackaby, and this is the Jackaby series. So they work off the premise that they can see the auras of supernatural beings, or they can see where magic has been at play, and they can use that special sight to be able to solve mysteries. I just loved this book so much. I don't care that I was spoiled. I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna reread the entire series. And it's like, there are little details, like I know that something happened with this character, but I don't know how. And I don't know what led up to that, you know? And I know that like these 2 characters, they end up in a romantic relationship together, but I don't know like, how did they first meet? And how did they like first tell each other that they loved each other, you know? So there's all those lovely little details that now I'm very excited to find out. I know the thing happened, but how did the thing happen? So, I don't know. I read it out of order, but what you gonna do? I really love the world building in this series, the way that the supernatural creatures and people are trying to mingle with ordinary humans. The police force is trying to keep track of all this rampant magic that has just been unleashed on the city. And of course, Jackaby and Miss Rook are just working overtime to assist the police. I really love their detective partnership. They're both of them full of witty little remarks and flippant quips. Jackaby kind of reminds me of Doctor Who in the way that he just carelessly meets danger with no plan and a silly grin. And I loved Miss Rook's character. She's very introspective. She's always analyzing the clues, but also analyzing like her relationships with people. We get to see her emotional turmoil. The writing is really excellent. The plot is mysterious and fun. The mystery definitely kept me guessing. There are a lot of like moving parts in the plot. Lots of things, lots of different threads everywhere. It becomes like this weird game of chess where you can't really tell if it's a magical clue or just like a normal clue. I gave it 5 stars and I can't wait to read the rest of the series. I also read a few really lovely picture books, some of them that were just so hilarious, or ones that were like really heartfelt. So I had quite a few picture books that I thought were really, really lovely. And those are all the books that I read in July. Please leave me a comment and let me know, how did your reading go for Jane Austen July? Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and remember, the right book in the right hands at the right time can change the world.